Hey everyone, my name's Eric and today I am going to do a video on why I bought a Super Nintendo in 2015. This guy right here. But before I get into that, I just want to give a brief shout out to Accent On Gamers. They were kind enough to introduce me to their community of fellow video gamers, and they have a fantastic channel. And not only do they have a fantastic channel, but they're also really cool guys in general. Mario and Senkai are really nice, and they've been really big supporters of my channel. So I just want to give them a brief shout out, and I can't thank them enough. Yeah, they're just super cool. So anyway, without further ado, my video is on why I bought a Super Nintendo in 2015. Now, just to give you a brief history, I never had a Super Nintendo as a kid. In fact, video games weren't really on my radar until I was about 7 years old, and that's when the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 took the spotlight. My parents at the time really couldn't afford to buy me a video game console, but I was lucky enough to get a Sega Genesis from a friend. And even though it wasn't the most recent console, I didn't care because to my 8-year-old mind, I was just so ecstatic to have a video game console in my living room. And I loved that thing. It was so great to me because it was my first real experience of gaming, especially on a television. I had a Game Boy before that, but to see something in color was a big deal. And this is even, like I said, this is after the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 came out. But like I said, I didn't really get to experience those things. But still, I loved my Sega Genesis, and I still have fond memories of it to this day. So eventually, I did get a PlayStation 1, and over time, I got a PlayStation 2 until I kind of eventually fell out of video games. And the reason being was I kind of lost interest. But it was only until recently that I had this newfound love for RPGs. And when I was a kid, the only real RPGs that were really on my radar were Pokemon and Kingdom Hearts, which I still enjoy. But I really wasn't exposed to that many RPGs as a kid. So, with the power of YouTube and the internet, I was able to do a little research. And in the past year, I've kind of been looking up a lot of people's favorite RPGs of all time. So, as I was doing this research, one thing I noticed was a lot of people's favorite RPGs and even some of their favorite video games of all time were on the Super Nintendo. And this really intrigued me. So I continued doing this research, and one thing that also really stuck out to me was that a lot of these games that started on the original Nintendo really came into their own when they were released on the Super Nintendo. For example, Metroid was originally on the Nintendo, but Super Metroid is really when it came into its own. Final Fantasy started on the Nintendo, but really came into its own when it was released on the Super Nintendo with Final Fantasy 3 or 6. And there were other examples like Zelda, eventually Link to the Past, Mother 1, eventually Mother 2. And I was just like, that really intrigued me as well. So throughout this entire process, though, there was something I kind of had to keep in mind because when you watch a lot of these videos on YouTube, you have to realize that the people reviewing the game were kids when the game came out. And I know that video games affect kids differently than they do adults. Perfect example is, again, Pokemon. When I was a kid, Pokemon blew me away. But as an adult, would I recommend it to another adult? Even though I love the game and this nostalgia is still with me to this day, I probably wouldn't because it's a fairly simplistic game, and they really haven't changed the formula that much since the 90s. So, with that said, though, I still kept an open mind because the other part of me felt that even though these people who are reviewing these games were kids when these games came out, there was enough there for me to realize that a lot of these titles were, there was something to them. There was something that they really did right. And I thought to myself, it's like, even if I don't end up loving these games, you know, these games had a big enough impact on a large group of people that it would be foolish of me not to recognize that and not to see it for the value that it has. So some of the games I picked up, I'm actually going to show you, and some of them were not cheap, but you can get them for cheap on the Wii U. Most of them, unless you're a psycho like me who has to have a physical copy of everything. Well, except for Suikoden 2, because I mean, I'm a little iffy about buying used discs, but I feel like if the world is going to end, the only thing that will be left is cockroaches and video game cartridges, because a lot of these games are over 20 years old, if not all of them, if I'm doing my math correctly. But yeah, what I did is and oh, on a side note, thank God they released Suikoden 2 on the PlayStation Network, because I really do want to play that game. A lot of people liked it, so I want to check it out. And with these games, though, the way I organized them was I did them from like from cheapest and most common to, I guess, most expensive, and I don't even want to consider a couple of these rare because the demand is really high for them. So they're out there, but the price tag is fairly high. But yeah, so I have 11 games here, and there's only two I actually played. I was able to get my hands on a Super Nintendo. Well, I played it at a friend's house when I was around 13, 14. And one of those games is actually one of my favorite games of all time. But we'll start with the obvious and the cheapest to the most expensive and hard to find. So, of course, the first one I got, it's this is kindergarten, folks. This is as basic as you can get. But that's not to take anything away from this game. Um, so Super Mario World's the first one. Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, is the second one. Donkey Kong Country 1 and Donkey Kong Country 2. These are the two games I did in fact play, and Donkey Kong Country 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. There's so much there to love, and there were so many things they did right with that game that it's still one of my favorite games to this day. Next one was A Link to the Past, as I mentioned, along with Super Metroid, another game. A lot, something that was interesting about this is they told me that the creators, one of the big things they tried to catch the spirit of was the loneliness in the movie Alien by Ridley Scott, which is one of my favorite horror movies. Next one is Super Mario RPG. You're going to start to see a pattern here with the company. Next is Secret of Mana. And of course, the other one I mentioned, Final Fantasy III. And that leaves only two more. So what two other ones could I have possibly gotten? Well, I'll show you. Chrono Trigger. And let's just say that the price for this one is getting really high. It's starting to get really up there. And of course, the last one I got was, let me bring that up a little bit, Earthbound, or Mother 2. And these, after doing the research, these were the games that had an impact on a lot of people. I looked at all these titles and I saw that they had an extreme amount of value in a lot of people's eyes. And nostalgia side, it seemed to me that there was definitely something to these games. But there you have it. There are some big titles of these that people consider to be classics. And is it a complete list? Of course not. There's a few games I still really would like to also check out, like just goofy fun ones like Turtles in Time looked really cool. Zombies Ate My Neighbor. I played that once, And the only thing I really remember about it was it had some really funky music to it, and I got a really big kick out of it. But you know, the whole reason behind this thing, really in simplest terms, is it gives me a chance to experience games that had a lasting impression on people. And I enjoy discovering what other people are passionate about, especially when it comes to video games. So, with that said, that's why I bought a Super Nintendo in 2015. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to speaking with you again. Take care.